You're listening to Book Banter with Dianne Burckhardt, your book talk podcast. Join me every Wednesday for real conversations with authors and publishing insiders, where you get to connect with the humans behind the books you love. Let's get on with our show today. Hello, my happy people. Today is May 20th, 2026, and today we have a very unique discussion for you. My guest and I discussed her life growing up in Colombia with both Jewish and Palestinian family roots during the turbulent 1980s, and how personal memories can sometimes become an important part of preserving history. This author is not only a writer and a communications professional, but has worked for nonprofits. Her debut memoir, The Roots of the Guava Tree, explores family, belonging, culture, and coming of age during a period of violence and instability that shaped both her country and her understanding of herself. So let's not waste any more time and get right to the interview. Please welcome to Book Banter with Dianne Burckhardt, author Sonia Daccarett. The way that I like to start these out is just to have my guest tell everyone who you are and what you do.
Okay. Hi, my name is Sonia Daccarett. I'm delighted to be on your show today. I'm the author of the memoir, The Roots of the Guava Tree, Growing Up Jewish and Arab in Colombia. And if the title doesn't quite tell you what the book is about, I don't know what does. The publisher was very precise about having the contents of the book very well on displayed on the cover. And as the title says, a memoir about growing up with a Jewish mother and a Christian Arab father in Colombia during the drug war 80s and a period of time in Colombian history where the country was going through a pretty violent upheaval and civil war that primarily coincided with my adolescence. So the book is about identity and family, but also about contemporary Colombian history and what it meant for just a normal Colombian family.
Yeah, there is so much to unpack with all of this. But the first thing that I do want to ask, though, I know that you have a degree in journalism and a master's in international and public affairs. What kind of work were you doing after you graduated with that?
I worked in corporate communications for about 20 or 25 years. I did corporate work for a large chunk of that. And then toward the end of my sort of working career, I switched to nonprofit communications, which was very rewarding. And it was a wonderful way to apply all the skills that I had to help nonprofits. But in the last couple of years, I've just been mostly writing and focusing my efforts on other things.
So when you start out in journalism, was there ever that thought that one day I want to write a book?
That's a really good question. No. No, in fact, I think I dabbled with creative writing when I was an adolescent and also in college. But after college, I just focused on really becoming a great corporate communicator and really didn't really hone any kind of creative writing skills. So to the point where I got to wanting to write about my childhood, I really had to go back and take some more classes and creative writing and do a lot of creative writing exercises to really get back into that flow of dialogue and scene setting and all the things that when you're a journalist or when you're a corporate communicator, you're not necessarily using in the way that you would in a memoir or in a work of fiction.
But one thing that I've noticed with a lot of the journalists that I've talked to who have become authors, the skills that they learned as a journalist did help them to write tight. Did you find that that was the same for you?
Yes. I mean, I think one of the things you learn when you study journalism is to answer all the questions that a reader might have and to think through what you're saying. And from the reader's point of view, am I answering the 5 W's, who, what, when, where, why? Am I covering all the information that I need to be covering? And also, can I do it in as few words as possible?
Yeah. You said that you were born to a Jewish mother and a Christian Palestinian father in Colombia.
Mm-hmm.
How did this unique combination shape your early sense of identity? Because I'm sure there weren't too many people like you around you.
Well, my parents were both born in Colombia. My grandparents were the immigrants, and my grandparents came from different places. My Jewish grandparents came from what is now Ukraine. And they left in the 1930s to escape anti-Semitism and found visas and safe haven in Colombia. And it turned out to be Colombia saved their lives because the Holocaust wiped out anybody in their families who had remained in Europe during World War II. And my father's family came from Ottoman era Bethlehem in the 1910s, 1920s. There was a big migration of Christian Arabs out of what was then the Levant. So Ottoman era Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, these were not countries then, but Christian Arabs left in great numbers and came to Latin America, where they created communities that were tight knit and that were in many ways very successful, started new companies and started new lives. So my grandparents were immigrants and they had very similar experiences. They came to Colombia with nothing. So my parents were first generation Colombians, kind of trying to figure out who they were, as first generation children of immigrants always do, and what makes me Colombian, what makes me Arab, what makes me Jewish. But also there was not a lot of time for navel gazing. They were working in their parents' stores and there was not a whole lot in the way of material wealth. So my parents actually had very similar upbringings. And I think when they met each other, they recognized in each other a set of similar values of hard work and education. And we are different, but we're not that different. And we have respect for other cultures. But we also are trying to figure out who we are. And so while they were on paper very different, I think in reality, they had so much more in common than what their differences were.
And that combination does make for an incredibly rich family history.
Yes, it sure does. One that I really didn't understand when I was growing up. So a lot of what the book really is about is me trying to understand who my parents are and who my grandparents are and what it all means to me. Because my parents, in those years and when they married each other, I think in a very utopian way, decided to create a family with no labels and no religion and no identity attached to it. Just, somehow they thought in their very sort of dreamlike way that it would all work out and I guess sometimes it does, but I think in Colombia's a very homogenous society in some ways, and being different is not as common as it is perhaps here in the United States, which is a nation of immigrants where everybody has a slightly different last name and everybody has a different family history. I think in Colombia, in general, people who come from other countries stand out a little bit more and have to explain themselves a little bit more. And my parents didn't really give me words to explain myself at all. And I think it was hard for me to not really have words to explain who I was and what my religion was and who my parents were.
How old were you when you actually moved to the United States?
I came here when I was 18 to go to college.
And was that a culture shock for you at all?
No, I mean, my parents sent me to the American school, which is also something I discuss in the book, which was a wonderful place for me. And I learned English when I was in kindergarten, and I had many American teachers, and I knew many Americans. And I had learned about American culture through reading and through books. And, it's just, it is an American school. So the lessons aren't just English, but also American values and American perspectives on things. So when I moved here, it was not a culture shock. Obviously, I was in a different country and I was an immigrant all of a sudden, but I was, for the most part, pretty familiar with what the United States was. I thought I was, in the kind of way that an 18-year-old thinks they know everything. And then quickly discovers that they really don't. But
you spent 2 decades in professional communications. When did the idea of writing a book actually come to you?
Well, I think when I became middle-aged, and I think, again, this happens to a lot of people, you start looking back on your life a little bit and thinking about there's more time and there's more space in your life. My kids got older and I started really thinking about my childhood and how disconnected it felt from my current life. I think many immigrants have this challenge where they have a before life in the country of origin and a current life in their new country.
Yes.
And sometimes, but sometimes the connector between those two lives isn't quite clear. And sometimes it feels like two completely separate lives for two separate people. And I really started thinking about answering some of the questions that I had not really answered in my childhood, thinking about the things that I hadn't really thought about, thinking about my parents more deeply, my grandparents. And I really didn't set out to write a book at all. I just set out to do a personal exercise in writing about my childhood to see what was there and what memories I could remember and jot down. And that's how it started, and then snowballed into a book. But it took a while.
So when did you actually start developing it as a book?
I would say I did a bulk of the writing around COVID era. So maybe 2020, then 2021. I think a lot of people found themselves with extra time to write.
Yeah.
Or certainly I did. And then after that, I looked at it and with sort of fear and trepidation realized that it was turning into a thing, that I either had to put it all away or turn it into a book and figure out if it was going to be a book, what it was going to really be about, and how to structure the book for a reader and not just for me. And that probably took another year. So, the process took maybe 5 years total, probably a little bit before, a little bit after, but something along those lines, mostly because I wasn't working in a linear way. I wasn't writing a book. I didn't have a business plan and a strategic calendar for goals and timelines. It was just meandering and sometimes being lost in the woods for long periods of time, not really knowing what to do with the material.
One thing that I always think is so important about memoirs like this is you're actually following a family at a time in history that there are very important events going on. How much of the history of Colombia and the things were going on in your life or around your life did you feel was important to put in this, or did you focus more on just your family?
I think one of the things that I longed to jot down on paper that really drove me to start writing was how different the city I grew up in, Cali, became from when I was a child in the late 60s and early 70s to the 80s in my adolescence, and then the way it is now when I go visit. When I was growing up, it was a very idyllic, or, nothing's ever idyllic, but in a child's view, it was a much calmer time. It felt like the city was really progressing and becoming a prosperous place, lots of building and development. There was a big international community who lived in Colombia at the time. And my parents bought a plot of land in what was then a remote suburb and built a house from the ground up in a remote hillside. When I went back to Colombia as an adult, maybe 10 or 15 years ago for the first time to Cali, I had not been to Cali for many years. I could not recognize the neighborhood I grew up in because the city had completely surrounded it. It was no longer a remote suburb. It was an entirely surrounded part of the city that had just developed tremendously. And I really thought I really wanted to put down on paper what it felt like to grow up with just kind of lizards and bats flying in my house and guava trees in the backyard and things that still exist because it's still a tropical country and the neighborhood is still a neighborhood of gardens, but it's not what it was then, which was very remote and to some extent sort of undeveloped land. So the city also grew up around it, and as did the big city problems. So in the 1980s, what started happening in Colombia was there had always been sort of intra-party violence for many decades. Then in the 50s and 60s, there was the rise of left-wing insurgent guerrillas that challenged the government for control. And then in the 1980s, due to the popularity of cocaine in the Western world, very powerful drug cartels arose in Colombia and also challenged the Colombian state for legitimacy. So there was essentially a three-way war between left-wing insurgent guerrillas, the drug cartels, and the Colombian government. And at first, and I do describe this in the book, and obviously in hindsight, looking back, it started as like a slow burn. You start seeing security problems and there's bodies in the street sort of every day, but security gets a little bit more challenging. People start talking more nervously about certain challenges and problems and drug cartels. But then as I got older, as an older adolescent, and I was also out and about and more independent from my family, things really started getting really bad in Colombia, and in particular in Cali, which had one of the biggest drug cartels in the country, the Cali cartel. So in my book, I write about the kidnapping of friends and acquaintances. I talk about the death of two boys that we all knew because they went to avenge a kidnapped family member and were killed in the crossfire. I talk about big political events like the takeover of Colombia's Supreme Court by a left-wing insurgent guerrilla that led to the death of half the justices and the burning down of the building. That was a big, shocking moment. The assassination of the justice minister. And, I'm probably 16 or 17 when these things are happening, and my friends are all 16 or 17, and we're adolescents and we're teenagers, and we're growing up in this world where, looking back, it wasn't normal. But to us, it was sort of vaguely normal, even when it wasn't normal.
Mm-hmm.
You're just surrounded by instability, but you're still going to school every day, and you're still having dinner with your family every night, and your life is just continuing to move forward. So I wanted to write about that as the backdrop for a normal Colombian family with all of these things that were going on that we now understand also much more with the hindsight of time and history and the fact that things got much worse much later. But at the time, it just felt like the reality. It was the reality of living in Colombia during those years.
And this is why I think memoirs like this are so important, because you can read a history book and see about the big events that are going on in that area. But when you read a memoir like this, you see how it affects people in their everyday lives, and it makes it more real and more accessible and understandable for people who weren't there.
I agree. I love memoirs of historical time periods, not just memoirs, but also historical fiction to some extent, because it really places regular people and characters in historical moments and brings it into perspective. I think one of the things that sometimes tends to happen is people tend to glorify figures like Pablo Escobar or Colombian cartel leaders and talk about their stories or watch certain series on Netflix about their lives. But often the perspective of what the consequences of their actions on regular Colombians are not understood or really seen. So I think it's important to understand what it does to regular people. And my family, we were really lucky. Nobody died. We weren't kidnapped. Nothing terrible happened to us, but it happened to so many people we knew. Nobody was untouched in the sense that it was always one circle of separation when you heard of something terrible happening to someone you knew.
Yeah. On your author one sheet for your book, there was something that really struck me. You have a phrase, "When home doesn't match the mirror." What does that mean for you?
That's so interesting. Okay. I would say, I think when home doesn't have a specific delineation, I think what happened was, for me growing up, I really longed to fit in and be normal, which I think is something that most children want.
Mm-hmm.
My parents were very independent thinkers, and they were very proud of their ideas and their stands on many things. And of course, looking back now, I have great admiration for my parents, and they were very rebellious and very principled. But as a child, I really just wanted to belong. I wanted somebody to tell me the words that I needed to tell people about who we were. I wanted to have long hair and earrings like every other girl in Colombia except me.
Mm-hmm.
And I just really wanted to look like everybody else and be like everybody else, which is exactly what my parents did not set out to do and would not bend their principles for. So it was a challenge between a child's really longing to belong and a parent's principle stance on this is what we believe about identity and about religion and about who we are.
I know while you were writing this memoir, you worked with another author for accountability. How did that partnership help you stay consistent?
Well, I happen to have a wonderful writer friend partner who is very disciplined and very prolific, which I am neither. And she keeps me accountable in just our writing schedule. And we know each other very well at this point, and we know our writing very well. So we can go deep very quickly with just a 3-word edit on one of a manuscript or a comment that will then sort of open up a whole world of what's wrong with this chapter, right?
Mm-hmm.
I happen to be the undisciplined, unruly partner in that partnership. She is the disciplined, prolific partner. So I think I'm the lucky one.
See, I would be the undisciplined one. I need to find somebody who has better discipline than me.
I would say that worked for me very well. So
What has been the most rewarding part of writing this memoir for you?
Two things have been the most rewarding. One has been discovering that my parents and my grandparents were human beings with imperfections, and just like all human beings, but also with incredibly admirable and just qualities that I'm very proud of. I think I didn't fully, like most children don't sit and think deeply about their parents and their grandparents until they're older and until they become parents themselves. And when I sat down to do that, and I sat down to really think about my parents, not just about my parents, but as characters, and what do they want? What makes them tick? Who are they? How can I make them come alive on this page? All of a sudden, they became so much more to me. They became fully rounded, fully developed characters in my mind, and not just my parents and not just my grandparents. And I grew to really love them intensely and much more deeply than I did before. It's not that I didn't before, but I think my understanding and my love for them is grown tremendously. So that was a gift that I did not expect from writing the book. The second discovery has been sharing the book with other people and listening to their stories as well. I think sometimes people hold on to similar stories about their own families, or it might be completely different, but it's all connected to the need to belong, the need to understand who you are, the need to find a place in the world. And when people share their stories with me, I have found it deeply moving and one of the best parts of bringing this book out into the world. I think when you're in a memoir in particular, memoirs feel very vulnerable. It's very scary to share your story. It's very scary to put it out in the world, and you don't really know how it's going to be received or who's going to read what into it. But for the most part, I have found my connections to readers to be richly rewarding.
See, and that actually leads us really well into the next question. What was the hardest part of telling such a personal story? Were there memories that surprised you at the level of emotions that they brought up while you were writing them down?
I don't know that anything was surprising, but I think the hardest thing for me was to walk the line that all memoirists have to walk between what is your story and what is someone else's story. And it's always, it seems like it's very clear, but really it isn't. Because if you're writing about a family, obviously your story is going to intersect with other people's. So it took me a long time to find what I felt that line was the right line for me ethically, and how to write about people that I loved, my family and my friends, with a sense of responsibility for not taking liberties for what was their story and not mine to tell.
What do you hope people actually take away from your book?
There are so many things. One is that there are Jews who live in other places and Arabs who live in other places. The global Jewish stories and global Arab stories of diaspora are not fully understood. Sometimes people are very surprised to hear that descendants of Arabs live in Latin America, or that descendants of Jews live in Latin America. So that's one of the stories that I want people to have a bigger appreciation for. I think diaspora stories and immigration stories are fascinating, and sometimes they tend to be a little sort of formulaic. So, for example, everybody in the United States supposedly came to Ellis Island, and from Ellis Island went to live on the Lower East Side. But there are so many other immigration stories than that. That seems to be sort of the Uber narrative for immigration in the United States.
Yeah.
I'm interested in things that are not that linear. So, for example, I was just thinking about Freddie Mercury, who was born in Zanzibar and ended up in the UK. And, there's fascinating sort of meandering stories of people who end up in different places and always have been. I would like people to know a little bit more about contemporary Colombian history and what happened to ordinary Colombians in the 1980s and 90s and beyond during that really tough period. I would like people to think about their own story. Above all, I hope if readers think about their own parents and their own grandparents in a deeper way, or have a deeper appreciation for who they are, I'm delighted, and I consider it gives me so much satisfaction when people say, I had never thought about my grandmother this way, but your book prompted me to think about her in X way or that way, or I didn't realize it, or I now have started thinking about it. And that makes me so happy. I think the joy that I have from really understanding where I come from more and who my parents are has been unexpected and a delight.
I just realized I didn't look up to see if your book was traditionally published or self-published.
And my publisher is She Writes Press, and they have a distribution arrangement with Simon & Schuster. She Writes Press is a hybrid press, and we've had a wonderful working arrangement. I would say that it took me a year to realize and think about how I wanted the book to be published. And I'm a first-time author. I'm a memoirist. It's really hard to get traditionally published, as I'm sure all your listeners probably know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I would have gone the self-publishing route. So when I met Brooke Warner, who's the head of She Writes Press, and we talked about my manuscript at the San Francisco Writers Conference, she said, send it to me. And I did. I was about to maybe start exploring university presses, and then She Writes Press said they would publish it.
So now who decided on the cover art?
She Writes Press is very involved in the cover art, but it's a collaboration, and ultimately it's both of our work. So we decided jointly.
Well, and I don't know what it is about it, but I find it very appealing. And I couldn't tell you why. I just really like it.
Thank you. I'm glad you like it. I liked it too. It took us a while. I mean, it took a while to figure it out and to figure out the title and all of that, but it was a good collaboration. Took a while to figure out which photo of my nerdy little 8-year-old self to put on the cover, but we finally figured that out too.
The one thing that I always do whenever I look at a cover art, I always think, okay, if I was walking through a bookstore and I saw that laying on a table, would I stop and pick it up? And I absolutely would.
I'm so happy to hear that.
And I think that's how you know if the cover art is doing what it should do.
Mm-hmm. I think there's trends in cover art. If you look at cover art, if you walk in now into a bookstore, you see that a lot of books end up looking similar because there's sort of some sort of obviously algorithm for what sells and what catches readers' eyes and
Mm-hmm.
colors and the font and the picture. And there's some sort of science to it. But within that science of what catches readers' eyes, there's also what differentiates all the other books from each other.
Mm-hmm.
So a good graphic designer is important.
Oh, definitely. So now seems like a good time to do our 5 quick questions that never turn out to be quick, but I am just too stubborn to give up. Are you ready?
Sure.
Now, a lot of times I try to make these specific for something about the author, but with you, I decide to go with total randomness.
Okay.
So question 1, what is your favorite thing about living in San Francisco?
Do I have to say one?
You can give me a couple.
Okay. The natural beauty all around the city is something that I never get tired of. I live close to the Pacific Ocean and I can go look at the Golden Gate Bridge every day on my regular walks.
Oh, nice.
National parks. I also live within proximity to Golden Gate National Park. And I find that I never, ever, ever get tired of the beauty of the city. I happen to be a very urban person and I love cities and city living. And this happens to be both sophisticated, livable city with really quaint and unusual architecture that you will find, and landscape and vistas that you don't find in any other city.
Yeah.
It's very unique. So I do love that. And I love the people.
Question 2. Which did you enjoy more, working with corporations or nonprofit clients?
I don't know that I have an answer to the one versus the other. I loved my time in corporate because I learned so much from very talented people who were working hard and had all the resources to develop very interesting communication strategies and think through all the issues. It was a time where there was no AI, there was no Google, there was no email. So we were all writing the press releases from scratch and thinking about the messaging from scratch. And I don't even know what my job would be now. And doing research and early in my career, cutting out little, newspaper clippings to sort of have files on issues and that sort of thing. Wow, that sounds very quaint. I just dated myself. Obviously, working for a nonprofit is very meaningful, and the day to day is it's just very rewarding that you're helping with mission and lifting the load and all of the things that a nonprofit, when it's functioning properly, is meant to do. I would say that the best combination was having worked in corporate for many years and then bringing the skills that I had to nonprofits, which are less resourced and often don't have access to the kinds of sort of training that I brought. So it was a good combination in the right order.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, to date myself, I can tell you the very first newspaper that I worked for, we were still doing layouts on boards with the wax machine and had to do the hand cut out color separations for photos. So,
Yep.
So yeah, I remember those pre-computer era kind of things.
It's so quaint.
But it was fun. You had more hands-on. I liked it.
There was definitely, I remember running to the fax machine, to get an important thing.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about dating yourself.
So here, question 3. What is the strongest memory you have from being in Colombia? It's like when you think of that time, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
The beauty and the heat of a tropical landscape. It's just like nothing else. Cali is so green, and so the biodiversity in Colombia is so stunning. And so as I said before, I had been to Colombia multiple times, but I had not returned to Cali for many years. And the first time I went, I got off the plane and I thought, oh my God, these mountains are the green of these mountains, the smell of the sugarcane in the air, the burning fields, the sounds of the birds chirping, the sounds of the city. It's just all so sensory. The flowers, the brightness of everything was just is my first memory. And the heat also, particularly Cali, which is very hot.
So question 4, what are you most proud of?
In life? Or
it can be anything.
Or
absolutely anything. I told you these were random.
Yeah, they are random. That's a really hard one. What am I proud of? I'm proud of my family. I'm proud of my life and the life that I have created with my husband and my kids and my community and my world and my parents. I'm very happy and proud of being who I am nowadays, and I'm proud of my story. I'm proud of who I am, of all the pieces of who I am.
And that's a great answer. So your last question, we're asking everyone the same question because we're building a database. It's going to be in our year-end book buying guide in November so that we can help people to buy new books.
Okay.
So question 5, which book series or individual book do you think has had the best book to movie adaptation?
Book to movie adaptation. That's a really good question. I don't know that I have a specific answer. I mean, I just saw Hamnet, but I haven't fully read the book. I am sort of half read it. So I can't really say that it was the right and the best adaptation.
Well, and this is just in your opinion.
Mm-hmm. I don't know that I have an answer for you. I do know that Julia Shear, who was a writing instructor of mine and also blurbed my book, and I admire her work so much. She wrote a memoir called Jesus Land and is being made into a movie. So I am looking forward to that because her book was so powerful. We'll see if the adaptation of her book is as good as the book, but
so we can make that the answer is future hopeful.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
So now that The Roots of the Guava Tree is out in the public, what's next for you?
That's a good question. I definitely have another book or two on my list of things that I'd like to write. There's 2 more memoirs that I am exploring, and the other one is a little bit more on the historical fiction front. As part of writing this book, I got really, really interested into the nitty-gritty stories of immigration, of Arab and Jewish immigration into Colombia, particularly in the early 1900s. I had never really fully thought what it was like for people coming from Ukraine in 1918 and from Ottoman era Palestine in 1910 and landing in a port city in Colombia, in Barranquilla, and then having to make new lives for themselves and crossing the world and seeing things that they'd never seen before, like mangoes, bananas, all kinds of racially diverse people, which the Colombian people are. I had never thought that it probably felt like landing on Mars or something. And I got really interested in those stories. And I'm thinking maybe of historical fiction around those themes. But that's another heavy lift. I just taught myself how to write a memoir I will have to teach myself how to do historical fiction, but those are kind of my projects that I have in mind.
Well, I think that sounds really interesting because just the idea of the length of that voyage, I mean, how much of their life would it take to get there? And most people don't live through that kind of a voyage.
It's crazy. I know, but so many people did. And yet so many people did, and their stories are not told. And I think, and then they got to the place where they got, and every ounce of their energy was on surviving and making a new life. And these stories just never were really told. I mean, some were documented, some were told, but not enough. So I'm really interested in that.
That sounds very interesting. So now let's remind everybody who you are and where they can find your book.
My name is Sonia Daccarett. I'm the author of The Roots of the Guava Tree, Growing Up Jewish and Arab in Colombia. You can find my book on Amazon, obviously, but you can also order it from all of your independent bookstores, all of your favorite independent bookstores. There are other places where you can buy it. It's available on simonschuster.com, which is the distributor. And if you find the book on that website, you can find all the places where you can order it from.
And of course, as always, we will have links to all of your social media and to buy your book in the description of today's podcast. So we'll make it very easy for everybody to just click and go and buy your book.
Perfect. Thank you. And if your readers want to get in touch with me for any reason, my website is soniadaccarett.com.
And I noticed that you also have an Instagram too. So many people are on Instagram today that's always a great way to connect with authors.
Correct. Exactly.
Thank you so much for doing this today. This has been absolutely fabulous. Your book is so interesting, and I can't wait to hear more from you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for including me on your podcast.
So there you have it, folks. That was my conversation with the incredible Sonia Daccarett, author of The Roots of the Guava Tree, a memoir exploring identity, family, culture, and growing up between Jewish and Palestinian histories in Colombia. Be sure to check out all of Sonia's social media, follow along, and see what is coming next for her. And if possible, go support an independent bookstore by picking up a copy of The Roots of the Guava Tree. And if your local indie bookstore does not currently have it in stock, request they order it for you, because we always want to support both authors and independent bookstores whenever we can. Now, next week, we'll be joined by Winifred Tato, who is truly a dynamic go-getter. Not only is she the author of the God Scion series, which we'll be discussing through Book 1, Child of Tempest, she is also an accomplished artist and founder of Wins Books, LLC. Be sure to check us out when we talk to her about her books, creativity, publishing journey, and everything else she has going on. And now for a little update on Burckhardt Books and Book Banter Productions. Apparently, I do not already have enough projects going on, so I decided to add one more thing to my plate, and I started creating a brand new interactive homepage for BurckhartBooks.com. Right now, the homepage is still in development, and we're looking for people willing to help us test it out before it officially goes live. If you are subscribed to our mailing list, you will receive a private link and password in this week's and next week's newsletters, so you can get early access to the new interactive homepage and explore all of the, interaction. And we want you to let us know what works well and what doesn't so that we can find the bugs that still need to be fixed before we launch this publicly. If you would like to take part and you are not on our current mailing list, just head over to burckhartbooks.com/subscribe and sign up for the mailing list. This is just one more example of the extra perks that our newsletter subscribers get access to, and we have a lot more planned for our subscribers coming in the very near future. It's completely free to join, and if you decide it's not for you, you can unsubscribe at any time. So why not give it a try? What have you got to lose? And we've made it even more simple for everyone. There is a link in the description of today's podcast so that you can just click and go and sign up today. Well, that's everything that we have for today, folks. So you know what that means. It's that time. It's time for you all to go forth and be really happy. So many great things are coming with Burckhardt Books and Book Banter Productions. Thank you for joining us today. Be sure to subscribe to Book Banter with Dianne Burckhardt on your favorite podcast streaming service. Because if you love books like we do, You do not want to miss a single episode of this podcast.